For many, the only option for Britain is to leave the EU, but with Norway and Switzerland opting to not be part of the European Union, but instead the European Economic Area, does Britain have any other choices? I spoke to Dr. Ingram, Oxford graduate and politics teacher, about his thoughts on a similar scenario to Norway.
Britain imports more from the rest of the EU than it sells itself. So in other words, they've got every interest in maintaining that trading relationship as well. Others point out it's a bit easier leaving Switzerland and Norway kind of semi-detached. Britain's a much bigger economy and they might not be prepared to do it. If Britain were to leave and the sky didn't fall down and there was some sort of bit like Norway or Switzerland, Britain had access to the free trade area but was outside of the EU. I suppose there might be a few other countries who might see that as a tempting model.
With the thought of Britain becoming more of a semi-detached nation, I spoke to Liberal Democrat MEP Bill Newsham-Dunn about his thoughts on a similar scenario.
The Norwegian Prime Minister about 2 weeks ago said, Britain, for heaven's sake, don't leave the EU. And Norway wants to join. And they've tried twice before, but they've lost referenda each time because the Norwegian people think that if they join the EU, we'll take all their fish and their oil away from them. But Norway suffers enormously from nobody listening to them. There's an expression called fax diplomacy. Have you heard of that? Fax diplomacy is the EU makes a law about something and we send a fax to Oslo saying, here you are, here's the new law, but you've got to obey.
Another Liberal Democrat MEP, Andrew Duff, said in regards to Britain having a situation similar to that of Norway,
they have to pay in a very large sum of money, they have to obey all our rules. Norway does happen to be a very rich country because of the oil, but the idea that Britain would be able to be a sort of poorer, larger Norway is complete nonsense.
The Liberal Democrat MEPs make the point that by leaving the EU, Britain loses the option to make an impact on laws decided, but still has to implement those said laws, and they still have to pay a large sum of money to be part of the European Economic Area. Though Roger Helmer, UKIP MEP, said,
when Britain leaves the European Union, we will be their largest external customer, bigger than America, bigger than China, bigger than anyone. So that means in terms of a relationship, they are the seller, we are the buyer. And typically, in trading terms, the buyer usually has plenty of clout.
UKIP MEP Roger Helmer discusses that despite Norway and Switzerland being put under pressure by the EU, Britain's economic power in Europe means it needs to be considered differently. He further goes on to discuss the issue of being in the EU and in regards to business regulation.
Less than 10% of British GDP is traded with Europe. For the sake of that less than 10%, we are actually having to impose EU rules on 100% of our economy. Little local companies that had nothing to do with Europe at all are still stuffed by European regulation.
What Lib Dems and UKIP seem to disagree on is the fact for the Liberal Democrats, Britain will face the same issues that Norway and Switzerland face, with laws being implemented without any say at all. But UKIP's argument to that is that Britain's clout in Europe means that this will not happen. What Dr. Ingram suggests is that no one knows for sure, as this has never happened in EU's history. But what is certain is the future of Britain and the future of the whole of the EU is still uncertain, and that Britain is going to play a vital part in this.